cool for making right. No, they love this, and if it stays warm, the longer it stays warm. Now it's the adult time.
Welcome, everybody. Oh, what a nice turnout. Oh, it's so good to see you all. Students present and past and administrators and wonderful people and faculty. Oh, how cool. Well, welcome to the, I don't know what year of Writers Project this is. Lale, you can announce it when you get up here. Dr. Davidson started this project a couple decades ago, and it's been going great guns ever since. But this semester has more events than we've ever had before, partly thanks to the graciousness of Professor Krista Rivera, who's running the 100,000 Poets for Change. So I can list it without actually organizing it. And thanks to Dr. Gilbert here, who is our Chief Diversity Officer. And we're doing a little tag teaming there. Thanks to Professor Rebecca Pelcher for so graciously giving us, sharing her space and even jumping on ladders and adjusting her precious art lights just so we can have a little light for our Zoom recording. Okay, I don't want to take too much time here, but we have two flyers on the snack table out there. One is the Writers Project newsletter for the semester, and the other, and it has the whole calendar in the sidebar. And the other is a flyer about our next presenter, who is the curator. I'm stumbling over words today. I'm so sorry. I'm undercaffeinated, but I'm happy to be here. The curator of this wonderful exhibit, Amy Kong, will be here next Monday. So we're going to go backwards through the alphabet because poor Nancy White has for 2 decades been the last presenter. And while that's always a wonderful ending, I thought it might be more fair to let her start us off this time. So let me give you a brief introduction to Nancy. Nancy White's first book, Sun, Moon, Salt, won the Washington Prize for Poetry. Her second collection, Detour, began thanks to the generous support of the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown and the McDowell Colony. And her third collection, which you've got to get, Ask Again Later, lets Bible characters from Ruth to God to Noah to Lucifer finally tell their side of the story. Her fourth is due out next year. Her fifth is complete, but undergoing at what she calls a composting process. It's a great metaphor, isn't it? Yeah. White's poems have appeared in Antioch Review, Black Warrior Review, Feminist Studies, Field, Massachusetts Review, New England Review, Plowshares, Virginia Quarterly Review, and others. She has taught at St. Anne's School in Brooklyn, at Bennington College, in the College of St. Rose graduate program, and in the Southern Vermont College Upward Bound program. Currently, she is a quote-unquote grizzled faculty member at SUNY Adirondack, actually the noble chair of our English division and editor-in-chief of the WordWorks, a poetry press based in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Nancy White.
Grizzled in the bio because you get, I don't know, I'm in my 6th decade and you're writing your bio out for somebody, you're like, geez, when did I get all this done? And well, I'm going to read 4 poems. The first one is from my second collection, which is called Detour, about how shit happens and your life doesn't go right, it goes whoop. And most of our lives do that a bunch of times so that our life actually looks like this. But we get somewhere eventually. I wanted to read this poem first as kind of a thank you to all my colleagues and students who were so patient and understanding. Last spring, when my husband died and I had to step back from teaching, I just couldn't get my brain to work. And people were so wonderful and kind, and like they understood what grief does, what it's like experiencing it, getting through it. And this poem is trying to describe that kind of major upheaval in your life. It wouldn't necessarily have to be grief, but loss is often a cause of the state that I'm trying to describe in this poem, which is called Green. You had softened, dissolved, become but liquid other people swam in, that you swam in, coloring and confusing yourself. Various others rushed by, pedaling hard, while you drifted in a thick-tongued tide of purely green, called it failure, necessity. Your new chant was diapers, diapers, bedtime, and sweetheart, no. Later, this time she won't come back. You went on and on, sea-like. Maybe we've been there. They're first fast and uncontainable, then full of urchins, poisonous, and jellyfish pumping on a current similar to love. The hated starfish grows back arms overnight. Again, the dying, birthing, the inconceivable vanishing of whole humans, the spark and raising everywhere of new worlds, and nobody noticing, not even particularly you. You got used to it, how there was no way to mark this passage, the self so permeated there was no one to be. Voice transparent, large, plain like the call of whales. How your breath lasts now, how you miss those gone. How you live in a river so swift you are frightened. How no song will replace or approximate those missing, and you must find another use for words. Yeah, so that's fun. So I started doing this project because a friend asked me, you got any poems about Jesus Christ? I'm putting together an anthology. And I was like, no, but I could write one, but I'm not religious. And she said, no, don't care about that. Just like modern contemporary views of who was this guy? You know, how do we see that story now from whatever point of view you want? So I did that poem and I sent it to her, and then I started thinking, yeah, and all those Bible characters, what if we saw them from a contemporary point of view? I mean, I didn't invent this idea. Many writers do this. But I had so much fun because as they're told in the Bible, there's very little detail. So there's so much you can make up. And the stories are never from the character's point of view. So if you get inside what you think their head is, and pretend to try to get to know them, it's a fun kind of experiment. So this is Jonah from Jonah and the Whale, right? He gets swallowed up. It's one of he's like torment. God keeps sending him all these problems. And I think the ultimate one, he's swallowed by a whale and off to sea he goes. And eventually he comes back to tell the story. So this is actual Jonah being asked about that experience afterwards. Jonah. I can't remember, not the way you heard it. Trials, but that you know yourself. Sit here in the shade. Let me see that hand. I have an ointment. Such curiosities everywhere I went. There was one girl, eyes as dark as dates, with that golden shade. She lifted a hand and pulled me near. Do you know, I still smell her, spiced and dangerful. She's one of the jewels of my old mind. They ask about the whale. Travelers want that story. And I do recall an island, a dull life, really. That tiny spring, never faltering, it saved me. Hot wind and a reek of seaweed rotting in the bay. I remember fear but a fishing boat found me, and I helped them haul their heavy nets. How that silver spilled up from the generous sea. They dressed me like a son, a thick robe, russet with a jaunty trim. For certain, the loveliness of strangers. A life like mine will show you that again and again. What a positive guy. I would have been like, all right.
Well, you wouldn't say that to God, would you?
Well, ironically, the next poem is from the point of view of God. So this is called Heaven. God, in my view, working on this book, he got some poems. It's really fun to write from the point of view of God, by the way, whether or not you believe in a God. So give it a shot. But he's having a little kind of cranky moment here because he's really fed up with us and how we always want more and we always want more. And no matter what happens, we always want more. In particular, we really would rather not be dead, really like our lives to just keep going, right? And, God's attitude is like, sorry, somebody else's turn, at least, in my world view. So heaven. Kept thinking I knew how to fit in finally with your plans, the way you think down there. But what I had pictured was a party. Bon voyage, favorite people, foods, trees, the grass, salvation sweet, sky, liberty blue, the can in your blood, an orange rejoicing, forgiveness abundant as potato chips, lusts, pinchers gone, greeds, shackles clacked open, regret, just some story where you finally get the punchline. Your true love and your other true love and your other true love all unite in remembering your charms. Your mother there, the way she could have grown to be if things in her life had been different. And you can take it all in, down to the meat in the chambers of your bones, the way you knew all along you could if things had been different. All of it. Your mind, the oasis blaze, the way you knew, and I knew your mind could do it. And it doesn't matter that for 88 years you didn't pull this off because you're doing it now. The sudden perfect knowledge of your funny, perfect life. The kiss-ass jobs, unmowed lawns, days you yelled, complained, blamed your neighbors. Cessation of crisis, disappointment, disbanded, delay, dead. That's the heaven I planned. Only no. Your kind, you do this thing, childish. It's got to last. Party, party, party. Otherwise, you can't believe it's real. Your mind, I mean. You can't believe it's all in there already. Everything you need, your heaven. I thought you'd be ready, see, for the dive off the end of the board, the scattering of all your borrowed particles back to quantum multiplicity, the soup simultaneously salty and sweet, hot, cold, the deep, the dust. Yes, it's a slash, a crackle, but a blossoming. Niagara, the rise of doom that blinds the nomads. You wouldn't believe how good it feels to cease being just your eye. The one you have dragged everywhere for fear of not existing. You just won't trust me on this one, will you? No matter what you mouth in church. But here I am, the only sustained persistence beyond assuring you. Your dissolution is superior to self. You won't buy it. Oh no, because it hasn't happened to you. But the only way you get to be where I am, not standing today, is to take your leap in ecstasy. Kiss your harp-strung, mortgaged dinner party of ego, me, self, ta-ta, goodbye, and ride over the edge, loving Cain, loving Abel, loving the unbeing of all you can't imagine yet, and just die. That's God in my view. All right.
It gets me every time. Next, we have Dr. Evan Sullivan, who will be reading Hallworthy Hall's The Man Nobody Knew and Facial Wound Narratives After World War I. He's an assistant professor of history at SUNY Adirondack, where he teaches American and world history. Evan earned his PhD in history from the University at Albany in 2020. He previously served as a regular writer for the collaborative academic blog Nursing Clio, which publishes histories of gender, medicine, and disability in relation to 21st century issues. His writing appears in the Journal of First World War Studies and the Journal of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. He has contributed chapters on histories of disabled veterans to 3 different books and is finishing a book of his own about blind veterans from World War I. When he is not researching, writing, and teaching, Evan enjoys time with his wife, son, and their cat, Molly. Welcome, Evan.
And he's a good baker.
Yeah.
I like things big. If you follow me on Facebook, I like to post pictures of my bread and my cats, or my cat. So that's me. So this piece that I'm going to read today is a piece I wrote for Nursing Clio, and it's based on a book published in 1919 called "The Man Nobody Knew." And Hallworthy Hall is an American author, and he's trying to come to terms with some of the carnage that came as a result of World War I. In his 1919 novel titled "The Man Nobody Knew," Hallworthy Hall introduced readers to Richard Morgan, a fictional American soldier who enlisted in the French Foreign Legion during World War I. Disaffected from his hometown of Syracuse, New York, and a broken engagement, Morgan fought in the war to prove his worth to society. Authorities reported Richard Morgan as dead shortly after he arrived in France in 1915, but he had actually suffered a severe facial wound and was recuperating anonymously in a French hospital. Despondent about his disfigurement, he found hope after hearing that surgeons could reconstruct his face to appear as it had before the war, as long as Morgan gave them a photograph of himself to guide their reconstruction. Rather than lend a pre-war photo, Morgan gave surgeons a postcard that depicted an attractive image of Jesus Christ. Morgan obtained his new sanctified face and went home to reclaim his lost love. It may be easy to write this story off as silly fiction, but Hall's Richard Morgan saga reflected the American public's simultaneous confidence in medicine and searing unease about the facial reconstruction of wounded soldiers after World War I. Facial wounds loomed large in the cultural milieu of belligerent societies after the war. Shrapnel, mustard gas, and bullets disfigured hundreds of thousands of soldiers' faces. There were even specific terms in France and Germany that invoked the traumatic nature of facial wounds. The French called them the men with broken faces. The Germans called them twisted face, or men without faces. Although these men tried to live ordinary lives after 1918, they became embodied reminders of the war's carnage. When leaders of the belligerent nations came together to sign the Treaty of Versailles, for example, the French delegation sent a group of facially wounded veterans to serve as a living protest to the German delegation. The U.S. Army struggled to reintegrate facially wounded vets into post-war society. Over 2,000 American soldiers had facial or jaw wounds, and 600 of those soldiers required extensive surgery in hospitals in the United States. At one such hospital in St. Louis, American surgeons kept patients under a, quote, visual quarantine. The men lived in a building that was physically separated from the rest of the hospital by a wooden ramp. The isolated patients usually endured 8 to 10 surgeries over a period of months or sometimes years in order to achieve restoration to what observers perceived as normal. The ramp that separated them, one observer optimistically wrote, was a bridge of, quote, joy, where over it men passed, their jaws shot away, every tooth gone, noses and cheeks cruelly torn, a sight to make angels weep, and back again they may come in time, restored to a normal type, end quote. Despite the fact that hundreds of patients went under the knife multiple times, little evidence reflected the patient's painful and prolonged surgeries. Instead, stories about men described the miraculous transformations done by surgeons. After a shell destroyed John Hyatt's jaw, teeth, and nose, taking away practically all of his facial features, he wore, according to one story, quote, an entirely new face that was just as good as the one he had before the war, end quote. The rhetoric about Hyatt's trauma implied that surgical transformations erased the physical and emotional price Hyatt had paid in service to his country, and conveyed to audiences that surgeons seamlessly remade wounded men as good as new. One writer even argued that surgeons molded, quote, broken humanity back again into the image of its maker, end quote, implying the godly powers that these surgeons supposedly wielded. It was in this context that Holworthy Hall emphasized similar medical transformation narratives in The Man Nobody Knew. A major theme in that novel, however, was not only Richard Morgan's physical reconstruction, but also his moral one. Morgan's pre-war life in Syracuse was troubled. He was careless and quick-tempered, and lived his life dependent on the good reputation of his successful father. After his facial reconstruction, he felt morally uplifted. Morgan became a man who embraced love and integrity and who donated his money to charity. The Man Nobody Knew linked already prevalent themes of visual appearance and morality to war wounds. In Morgan's case, facial disfigurement and the subsequent surgery gave him the opportunity to turn his life around from being a drain on society to being an industrious, moral, and loving individual. Facially wounded veterans did not always experience such seamless transitions or miraculous transformations as Morgan had. Roy Canby returned from service in World War I with one side of his face scarred from mustard gas. After his return, his girlfriend Gertrude left him and he attempted to take his own life. She was fixated on his wound and claimed that she would not be with a man, quote, whose face looks like it had been branded with a small waffle iron, end quote. Gertrude also emphasized a change in Canby's personality following the war. She noted that he no longer liked to have fun and took life too seriously. Roy Canby's troubled homecoming was not unique. Few American veterans had their experiences as open to public scrutiny as Canby. But European vets give further indication of prolonged struggle. Many of the 60,000 facially wounded British vets felt exhausted by the many surgeries they endured and had difficulty finding employment. Jobs such as cinema projectionists were viewed as favorable to facially wounded men, as they could remain in the dark and out of public sight. Some men were disillusioned upon experiencing terrified reactions from their children. Yet in the face of trauma, stigma, and ableism, facially wounded veterans promoted messages of independence and self-reliance. Richard Morgan did not encounter the myriad challenges faced by Roy Canby or his European counterparts. The Man Nobody Knew uncritically reflected themes present in post-war news articles and about the surgical responses to American facially wounded veterans that didn't take into account the trauma that the wounded men experienced. Morgan's saga, much like the stories about actual facial wounds, kept the wound story firmly in the background and instead focused on the benefits of modern surgery to remake the individual. Not only could Morgan have his face restored, he was able to choose whatever face he wanted and experience a moral transformation to boot. Ultimately, such stories left the thoughts, feelings, and traumas of real veterans, the men nobody really knew, unexplored and unknown in the service of legitimizing war and minimizing its physical costs on human bodies and minds. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That really shows us, reminds us all how much our words matter, right? How we can gloss over each other's tragedies for PR. It's just horrible. Is Johanna here?
Yeah.
Joanna? Hello, there she is. Okay. With the BA in English Literature from UMass Amherst and a master's in teaching from Simmons College, Johanna Spero taught high school English for over a decade before becoming an award-winning writer, I should say, and is the author of 8 novels under the name J.D. Spero. Still, her heart is in the classroom, and she is thrilled to join the faculty at SUNY Adirondack this fall. She has done author visits in school classrooms across the Northeast and has taught writing workshops locally at Weowaka, the Hyde Collection, and help me, Chingachgook? Chingachgook. Thank you. Their women's retreat, and most notably following the footsteps of Stephen King at Exeter High in New Hampshire. I bet that was something to follow, huh? After living in the Boston area for over 20 years, she returned to her hometown of Lake George to raise her 3 sons, although her family will always root for Boston sports teams. Please welcome Johanna, or J.D. Spero.
My father's still a Yankees fan, so there's a healthy disagreement in my family about that. So I'm going to read from my latest novel, Hackware. This came out in August. I have not done a public reading for this book yet. Very exciting. This is a little bit of a aberration for what I usually write. It's a little science fiction, but it also is a love story, and it's also could be seen as an allegory for the dangers of relying on technology a little too much. So what we do when we see a book that we might want to read, we maybe turn to the back and read the back. So I'm just going to read the back for you before I dive into the first chapter. So it's 2065. Half the world's population is made up of droids. Droids with such sophisticated AI, they pass for humans. In an apocalyptic New York City, Chevy Rose is still grieving her parents' deaths when her boyfriend Gage collapses unconscious. When his diagnosis confirms he suffered a ransomware attack, Chevy must admit he is not human, but a droid. Chevy's desperate journey to save Gage leads to shocking discoveries. A terrifying motive by Russian hackers is revealed as the computer virus spreads well beyond Gage's operating system. If Chevy can't reverse the damage before it infiltrates the world's fragile healthcare infrastructure, a life-saving serum her late mother created will be at risk, and so will the lives of all surviving humans. So I just have to tell the inspiration story behind this book, because I find it very interesting how I got the idea for it. So my husband runs a healthcare company, and it's the kind of company that provides medications to nursing homes and hospitals. So in the middle of the pandemic, it was the dead of winter on a Friday night, his company got hit by a ransomware attack, and they were demanding $5.5 million, and they held their data hostage. And so it was a nightmare weekend, and all weekend long, he had to shut down the servers, get new hardware, get all the backup from the cloud, and all this stuff that I took a crash course in learning to write this book. And when it was over, he said, gosh, it's uncanny how similar this computer virus is to the pandemic, how it morphed and found the most vulnerable way to, spread. And a light bulb just went off in my head, and I had this idea for a computer virus to attack a droid population that we were dependent on as humans. So I'll read chapter 1. Throughout the book, there are sprinkled chapters from the perspective and the voice of the actual computer virus. So chapter 1 begins with that voice. So this is the computer virus talking. The Black Widow's name is apt, although it is it's not the most venomous of arachnids in existence. It is perhaps the cruelest. Urban legend claims she consumes her mate in order to dispose of him, by human standards, a grotesque and unthinkable offense. I'm not named after the Black Widow, though I can be equally ruthless. They call me, a computer virus, Tarantula, because some 20-something IT prodigy with a pimply chin and an exceptional talent for coding thought it sounded cool and intimidating. False logic. A quick gander into a pet world shows that tarantulas are considered pets, right there with guinea pigs and parakeets. talk about threatening creatures, but I digress. My design stemmed from spider-bot technology. My job is to hack into secure data systems and wreak havoc. My far-reaching legs multiply infinitely, first infecting software and shared platforms, and then attacking actual hardware, hitting where it hurts most, your phone, your computer, your droid partner. That pimply kid did his job well and was paid handsomely for his work. Little did he realize my algorithm would morph into a new, more toxic variant no one could understand or control. But that didn't stop them, the hackers, from implementing it while clinging to the false belief that they're the ones calling the shots. That's funny. The year is 2065. I'm traveling to my next victim, a new system, moving like blood coursing through veins in the human body, hot and alive and pulsing with energy. As with most disasters, this one starts small, but it will tell my story better than my lame arachnid analogies can. Besides, your context is within human standards, as I mentioned before, right? Maybe Black Widow would be a better name for me, considering the grotesque and unthinkable offense I'm about to commit.
I've got my freshmen reading essays about AI, so I'm going to have to refer them to your novel. Professor Krista Rivera is entering her 5th year as an assistant professor at SUNY Adirondack, where she teaches college writing, creative writing, and creative nonfiction. She earned her BA in English Adolescence Education from Marist College and her MFA in creative writing with a specialization in poetry from Adelphi University. Some of her poems can be found in Miletus. Did I say it right? Okay, an international literary magazine. Nature's big and small wonders inspire her every day, and they often make appearances in her writing. She's also the coordinator of 100,000 Poets for Change, and I'm going to let her tell you about that before she reads. Come on up.
Hello. How are we doing? Good. Yes, so 100,000 Poets for Change. I'll make a quick announcement about that. There are 2 events going on this week. The first is on Thursday. It's a student poetry open mic. I actually have flyers, so I'll maybe split it. Want to take one, help yourself. But that will be on Thursday at 6 p.m. in the Residence Hall multi-purpose room. And it's centered on the themes of peace and the planet. So 100,000 Poets for Change is all about channeling the power of poetry to incite positive change in the world for people and the planet. So we hope that some students will come out and share some of their work at that event. The second event, also centered on the themes of people and the planet, peace for people and the planet, is the professional poetry reading, which will be on Friday, this Friday at 4 p.m. in this room that we're in right now. Great local poets will be coming to present their work. So I'll send out a flyer for that as well. And I hope you will join us. Light refreshments will be provided. Okay, so the first poem I brought is about certain times when I've kind of just found myself sulking and brooding over things I can't control rather than being present and just enjoying the gifts of everyday life. I've caught myself missing a lot. And I think in every situation, we have 3 choices that we can make. We can either act to change the situation that we're in, or we can remove ourselves from the situation, or we can accept it. And any other use of our energy and emotion is, essentially a waste. So this poem is called Wasted on Woe. Your thumb rubs against your index finger like a mini, mindless violin of misery. The song you're playing goes a little like, woe is me, a minor tune soaked in Eeyore gloom. You're out on your balcony in search of fresh air, the stuff in your lungs too stiff and stale from the stillness your sadness breeds. From this height, perhaps your heart will be lifted off its scraped knees, perhaps not. You look out, but today you're blind. You hold nothing but the half-dead crabapple tree in the worn blanket of your blank stare. Sure, the tree seldom flares into bloom anymore, but look, life flutters this bright morning between its bony branches. Don't you see the dark-eyed junco, brave amid all your fears, ready for bug battle in its medieval helm of slate? And how about the white-breasted nuthatch, its nasally laughter, puffing its paunch, poking fun at your frown? Oh, and there, behold, the black-capped chickadee, a bit shy behind its black mask, whistling a sweet Phoebe serenade, its voice dipping down into the second note like a leaf sinking beneath the smooth face of a pond. A sound so like love, don't you think? Or is all you can hear grief? The cardinal never comes, but its siren wails in the distance, notes firing like flares. This is an emergency. Stand back from yourself. You've ignited into an anguish you can't seem to extinguish. But wait, look, the blue jay arrives with buckets of sky pouring down its back. It fans its Art Deco feather tips, summoning you to the dance floor, but you refuse to bust a move. It's too bad, really. Such a waste that you're missing the celebration, too glum, too focused on the storm, brewing gray on the blue jay's breast, wasting away the sunny day, wondering when it's going to rain. And then the second poem is in honor of the autumnal equinox that just took place a couple of days ago. So I dug up an old poem that I wrote to praise leaves that I thought would be like a good fit for this. And it's a poem I wrote when I first started kind of recognizing my deep appreciation for the natural world, when I started noticing more things worth celebrating. So it's called Ode to Leaves. You rank supreme. The towering tree holds you. Without you, it'd be nothing but a splitting plank of wood shoved into the ground. You, the decor, the gentle gems, the waxy wealth, the shade for which sultry air pants, the beauty of a bird's eye view. You are above it all. You live a life of endless risk, dangling on a fine stem. Boast of your travels, from green to crimson clue that summer is gone, the hint many wish to ignore, falling heavy at their doors. Yet you do not fight the tilt of earth, the changes that it brings. Resounding courage in your silence, you claim your victory. From branch to descent, the dignity with which you fall. Your calm, cool pacing, no rush to your plunge. You sway, drift down to the ground, a hero's journey in your dance, each sway enslaving gravity, making it your fuel. You ride the wind, charging through the air, winding into swirling funnels, finding triumph in the fall. Oh, the heights from which you've sprung, and in your end, you've only just begun. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Next, we have Dr. Khristeena Lute, who completed her PhD in 2016 from Middle Tennessee State University and is currently an associate professor of English and director of the CRW in Scoville Library here at SUNY Adirondack. She has received the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Scholarship and Creative Activities and the SUNY Adirondack President's Award for Excellence in Teaching. Her recent publications include her debut novel, Finding Grace and Grit, 2021, Choosing to be Artists, Women's Networks in Evelyn Scott's Escapade, 2021. And Embracing Ambiguity, Navigating the Liminal Waters of Grace King's The Little Convert Girl, 2019. Please welcome Dr. Lute.
I do a little blend of my projects. Sometimes they are literary, they are fiction, sometimes it's criticism. The piece that I'm going to read today is the one that actually was just published about 10 days ago with the New American Studies Journal. This particular journal is an open source journal out of Germany. That was really difficult to say, by the way. In my work with this particular journal, they invited me to join their editorial board. So I worked with one other American scholar, a distinguished professor from UPenn, along with 3 German scholars on this entire issue. It was a fantastic process. My paper is focusing on Khristeena Trask, who is the local of the local Trasks. We went to Weowaka doing the research and things. This is what came of that. Because it's literary criticism, our works tend to be very long. So I'm just going to read the abstract and a little bit of the conclusion. Okay, but it is completely open source and available online. Okay. Khristeena Trask, The Gilded Age of Philanthropy. Khristeena Trask is best known for founding, both financially and idealistically, Yaddo, the artist retreat located in Saratoga Springs, New York. Spencer and Khristeena Trask's sense of service and philanthropy was informed by her love for Arthurian legends and the medieval notion of patronage, wherein the wealthy fund and support artists and writers. Trask devoted her life to serving, so much so that her own literary career has become but a footnote to her charity. She began her writing career after the loss of her 4 young children, and over the span of her lifetime wrote essays, plays, poetry, and novels, in addition to being a prolific chronicler of events. Historical and scholarly attention on Trask should be extended beyond references to her wealth to include these literary accomplishments, not as a mere footnote, but rather as an independent aspect of her life worthy of its own critical attention. In this essay, I argue the legends of King Arthur and Faust and ethics associated therewith directly inform Trask's literary works and the larger notion of service throughout her lifetime. So through this piece, I then do an exploration of her biography, how her life experiences and the different philosophies that she is just deeply infatuated with, how this then is conveyed through her literature. I do a very in-depth close reading of her very first work, Under King Constantine, which came out in 1893, along with her most famous play, In the Vanguard, which came out around 1913. I'm going to jump ahead though, because time. So I'm going to go ahead and just do part of my conclusion here. Honestly, it's also based on World War I, so it feeds off of what Evan was talking about earlier. In April of 1917, Trask worked on what would become Yaddo, an actual book that she has done that's privately published. And due to her diligence in writing that volume, her ideas and intentions are clearly stated and archived. Even in the middle of the darkest war, Trask remained hopeful. This is also after the death of all 4 of her children and her beloved husband. The phrase that she has included about Yaddo and World War I. Art seems as far off, as unimportant, and as unthinkable as does the study of the flora in the midst of the deluge. But slowly, day by day, during this long, bitter year, the thought has been growing within me that perhaps, after all, it is more necessary now than ever to work for the preservation of beauty and the idea in art. Perhaps the struggle to preserve Pine Guard, the original name for Yaddo, is more my duty now than it ever has been before. That's the end of her passage. Duty is the word that Trask uses here and throughout all of her writing. She viewed every act of service as her Christian duty. She wrote every novel, play, poem, and essay with the goal of bettering others' lives. Under King Constantine was her own call to action, and that action branched into every facet of her life. In her unpublished 1995 biography on Trask, Anne Key Simpson writes as her closing line, In retrospect, Khristeena Trask, a superb humanitarian aided in her pursuits by Spencer Trask and Foster Peabody, was never deterred from her goals. She merits further study as a woman and a writer, end quote. Today, the same notion rings true. Trask has still not received the critical attention warranted by her work, though her service and financial contributions are frequently noted. Her devotion to her dream of a better world combined European pageantry and a sense of patronly duty, and was expressed in her literary and philanthropic works. A rare mind indeed, Trask remains unique and her career critically unexplored. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so cool. We were out, when was it? In the spring? At
last summer, yeah.
yeah, Weowaka, and this is what's come of it. She was still working on it at that time. Our next reader is our last reader is Dr. Lale Davidson, a seasoned storyteller and the author of the novels Blue Woman Burning, a magical realist coming-of-age novel, Against the Grain, an environmental thriller with a mystical twist, and Beyond Sight, a ghost story set in Saratoga Springs, New York, which comes out next week, right? Yay! Tell them about your opening when you get up here. Her collection of magical realist short stories, Strange Appetites, won the Adirondack Center for Writing's People's Choice Award. And as a professor of fiction writing and public speaking, she won the Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Scholarship and Creative Activities. Visit LaleDavidson.com for more information. Please welcome Lale Davidson.
Hi there. Yeah, so I handed out some descriptions and there's more in the back here if you want to. The big ones have the plot on them and the bookmarks don't. But they have the important information, which is that I'm going to do the book launch reading at the Northshire October 5th at 6 p.m. And I'm sharing that reading with another writer, MG Bell, who is new to the area. So the books will be on sale there for signing, but they won't be available anywhere else for, I don't know when the books will be up here. But eventually, hopefully sometime in the middle of October, the books will appear in places like Barnes and Noble, and you can order them from your bookstore. The other thing we are doing is we're re-releasing Against the Grain, and I'm excited that I got, I'm excited that I got a blurb from Bill McKibben. It says, a new slant on a fascinating moment in environmental history and on the long, deep communication between trees and the world around them. So I was pretty excited to get that. But I wanted to read to you tonight on my ghost story because, you know, it's almost October and I love ghost stories. I hope you do too. The little short blurb on it is, in scenic Saratoga Springs, ghosts of a dark capitalist past awaken and challenge a young woman's supernatural powers. So part of this is, it takes place, it's SUNY Adirondack students and Skidmore students, and it takes place in the present, but there's also another narrative about Julie's father. So there's kind of there's a backstory. And in that backstory is another figure from the Gilded Age, Henry Hilton, a real figure who was a very wealthy man. Probably he would be a billionaire today, then he was a millionaire. Who came by his fortune by sinister means, and he is haunting the book as well. So here's the chapter 1. I blame my college English professor. She's the one who assigned us the autobiography. My father died when I had died of an aneurysm when I was only 4 years old, or so I was told. As far as my mom was concerned, the topic was verboten. There were no pictures, no fond memories, just don't ask. Not asking was part of my DNA. I was used to obeying unspoken messages. I didn't even know I got them. I did look though. When I Googled him, very little came up. On Facebook, Perrin Sykes got no matches, None. And Sykes turned out to be a few different families, but it was impossible to tell if we were related, and I wasn't about to ask. It would have helped if I knew his birthday or where he was born, but I didn't. I don't have weird extrasensory perception. I don't hear voices, and I don't believe in ghosts. And God is not talking to me. I definitely do not see silver granules zooming into black holes inside people. Not anymore, anyway. That was just a childhood fantasy, right? I'm totally normal Julie Sykes. At least that's what I used to tell myself in high school in an effort not to be an outcast. Totally normal, totally average Julie Sykes. Average looks, average height, average intelligence. Okay, well, maybe slightly above the average intelligence. It was the mantra that coursed through my veins. I thought I put on a believable act. I just about convinced myself. But my true self must have cracked that shiny veneer because only the abnormies were drawn to me. My best friend, Samantha, and her boyfriend, Jonathan, were excellent cases in point. Samantha was like an extra Snow White, with skin as white as snow and hair as black as coal, yada, yada, but comfortably overweight, excitable, and sassy. So the immediate catalyst for all the trouble that was to come was that darn autobiography assignment. It commanded us to find pictures, letters, journals, and to interview relatives. Since we never saw my Aunt Peggy anymore, that left Mom. And the more I thought about it, the lamer it seemed that I had accepted her status quo. What harm could there be in searching her room or the attic for pictures, letters, anything, while she was still at work? I'd lost my father. Didn't I have a right to his memory? When I entered her bedroom, the word trespass flashed across my mind like an extreme weather banner. Her bed was neatly made, her clothes all hung up, the scent of her skincare products hovered in the air. We had a decent relationship, I suppose, but she'd always had super clear boundaries. I wasn't allowed in her room unless invited. The commandment was like a force field I had to press through just to approach her dresser. She'd artfully arranged a jewelry box, a wood inlaid bowl for frequently changed rings and earrings, and a candle, all dust-free, unlike my cluttered room. I searched her glossy jewel box and her folded underwear drawer. Who folds underwear? And I rifled the pages of her books. Nothing. Next, I climbed the narrow stairway to the attic. In the dim light of the round window, I searched through all the dusty boxes. Nada. Not one picture or sweater of my father's. Not even a framed degree or a cigarette lighter or whatever. Had he smoked? I had no idea. No passport, no birth certificate. If I didn't have a dim memory of him, the smell of wool and soap riding his knee as he chanted, "This is the way the lady rides, clippity, clippity, clip," I'd think she'd invented him. She told me he was from England and that he was in the Skidmore geology department. Perrin. I love that name. It means little dark one in Cornish. When Mom used to read to me, I'd lie in the crook of her arm and spin her wedding band on her finger. It was heavy and radiated warmth that I thought was a message from him to me. So finally, she searches through and she finally finds a ceramic horse that's blue and kind of windswept looking, and she's sure it's his. So I'm skipping a bit here. In the privacy of my room, the horse vibrated in my pocket like an incoming text. I pulled it out and wrapped both hands around it. There it was again, a warmth, an energy wave. My dad talking to me. That little horse woke up a longing I couldn't put back to sleep. A flash of laughter, an answering light, like gold coins showering me from above as he dandled me on his knee. Who would I have been if my father had lived? I was exhilarated, but also scared. I had worked hard not to feel feelings like that. I was totally normal Julie Sykes after all. So yeah, it was a bunch of things that triggered stuff. However, the straw that broke the camel's back was when I became reacquainted with Damien Quinn at SUNY Adirondack Extension Center a week later. It was like I had walked through a dull threshold into a bright space. I couldn't turn back. Around Damien, I had to stop pretending to be a normie, and that's when my world more or less exploded. And you'll have to read the book to find out the rest. Thank you.
made a horrible faux pas. Did I say last? Speaker?
You did.
I meant penultimate. Get it? Penultimate. See what I did there?
Yeah, nice.
We have the one. I have a corny sense of humor. You've got to forgive me. If you want to hear me read, you'll have to come to 100,000 Poets for Change, because I wanted us to hear the fabulous Professor Holly Ahern, and after that to ask questions of the faculty. So students, if you have questions about what they read or the courses they teach, this is a good chance to do that. Holly Ahern is an award-winning professor of microbiology at SUNY Adirondack with over 30 years of teaching and research experience in molecular biology and microbiology. She has written nationally published laboratory textbooks, including the first open educational resource, OER, Laboratory Manual for Undergraduate Microbiology. I don't think I realized that. I mean, not that it was the first, that's great. In addition to her work in microbiology education, Ahern is also a nationally recognized Lyme disease researcher and advocate, and has served on state and federal working groups to advance research and improve diagnostics and treatments for Lyme disease patients and others suffering with chronic illness. Please welcome Professor Ahern.
Oh, I think you just meant that because all the other speakers were from the English department, and I'm from the scientific realm. And I just wanted to say that in science, there is more than one style of writing, and one of the main styles of writing is, how do I put it, really boring. You have to have expertise. You have to know what the words mean. You know, the idea is the writing reflects objectivity, just what you did, how you did it, what your conclusions are. And then, however, in science, there's also the form where you take what you did and turn it into something that isn't quite so scientific, and so that the lay reader would be able to read it. So what I thought I would do today is to read from both of those. And of course, the research that I chose was Lyme disease. So from a publication that I did that involves SUNY Adirondack students and faculty back, I don't know if any of you were here and actually participated in that, regarding how many cases of Lyme disease there actually are, to kind of compare that to what was being reported by reporting agencies, and then also just a little bit of personal experience on that. So I'll start with the abstract, just so that you can kind of see this. So this was published in the Journal of Microbiology Research in 2013, so about 10 years ago. The title is Comparison of Lyme Disease Prevalence and Disease Reporting in an Endemic Area. So there's two words, right? Prevalence and endemic. Do you know what that means? So you see what I'm saying? The words tend to be difficult sometimes. Lyme disease is the most commonly reported vector-borne illness in the United States. However, controversy surrounding the diagnostic criteria has led to claims of both underdiagnosis and overdiagnosis of Lyme disease by physicians. While both result in errors in estimating disease risk, underreporting of Lyme disease by public health agencies underestimates the risk and increases the disease burden on individuals and on society. A population-based cross-sectional study was conducted to evaluate the rate of probable Lyme disease diagnosed according to CDC criteria. Responses were compared to electronic Lyme disease surveillance statistics. The survey had a response rate of 60%, N, meaning the actual number was 600, so 600 respondents out of 1,000. And 2% of the survey respondents reported being diagnosed with Lyme disease according to CDC criteria for probable Lyme disease. This is significantly higher than the number of reported cases both locally and nationally. 16% of undiagnosed survey respondents reported subjective signs and symptoms consistent with late-stage Lyme disease. Thus, in a region endemic for Lyme disease, cases are diagnosed by physicians more frequently than they are reported to public health agencies. And in addition, a significant proportion of the study population report signs and symptoms consistent with late-stage Lyme disease. Together, these results indicate that there is an underestimation of Lyme disease risk and an increase in public health burden for people who live in endemic areas. So how many words were in there that you actually understood. And I also, the nature of writing is to keep it as objective as possible. So you probably noticed a lot of passive voice and all of that. So then, moving on from there, I also serve as a grant reviewer for several things, one of which is the CDMRP, which is a congressionally directed medical research program on Lyme disease research topics. And after doing that for a couple of years, they asked me to write a, just something like a blog, right? To just kind of explain how I got here, what I'm doing and why. And so compare this style of writing with that style of writing, same topic, same themes, but this is more of a personal approach. One May, my daughter was bitten by a tick. The tick was an adult stage female black-legged tick. It was attached to her for less than 12 hours. And although she was examined by her doctor, the bite was dismissed as a possible health concern. We were told that since the tick was attached for less than 36 hours and wasn't the right kind of tick, it was an adult, not a nymph stage tick, she was at low risk for developing Lyme disease. She was advised to go home, and if a rash, fever, or flu-like symptoms occurred, to return for antibiotic treatment. No rash appeared at the site of the tick bite. She didn't develop a fever or flu-like symptoms. Months passed and the tick bite went untreated. Then, after setting college records for swimming and making All-American her freshman year in college, my daughter came home for a long weekend. On her first night home, she had a fever and complained of aches and pains. By the next morning, her symptoms have escalated. Over the next several weeks, she suffered searing headaches, a heart arrhythmia, overwhelming fatigue, and sensations like electricity running up and down her arms and legs, making her muscles feel like they were on fire, and those are her words. The left side of her body went completely numb. Her physician and the specialists we took her to were clueless. One even suggested that her symptoms were somehow related to her being a girl. We had to request the test for Lyme disease since not one doctor she saw even considered that a tick-borne illness could be the root of her disease. Lyme disease is caused by a remarkably insidious microbe named Borrelia. This bacterium, a spirochete like the one that causes syphilis, has the ability to disrupt the immune system and stealthily travel through blood vessels to infect tissues, and especially those surrounding the joints, the heart, and the nervous system, resulting in symptoms that occur in stages. Diagnosis is difficult because the features of the illness are often nonspecific. The supposed hallmark of the disease, a rash shaped like a bullseye, only occurs in a minority of patients. The only recognized test for Lyme disease is highly inaccurate as a diagnostic tool. Every year, more than 500,000 people are bitten by ticks and develop Lyme disease in the United States. Only a fraction are promptly diagnosed and treated. Despite medical and public health assertions that most patients with Lyme disease recover fully, the reality is many do not. As my daughter's case illustrates, the longer the time between diagnosis and the first treatment, the more likely that those symptoms will become persistent and disabling. My family's journey from tick bite to diagnosis, treatment, and resolution of my daughter's symptoms was long and difficult. We were marginalized by a medical system overly invested in a narrow, outdated medical perspective that hasn't changed in over 30 years, despite newer science showing that the disease is far more complex than previously thought. We had to navigate an insurance system unwilling to reimburse for treatment of a disease that didn't fit the outdated definition, and we had to find ways to pay for those treatments that ultimately returned my daughter to a functional state. And we had to consider what the future held for all of us should my daughter remain disabled, all as a result of an infectious disease. As a microbiologist and an educator, I'm now working with others to help others navigate the difficult terrain of Lyme disease through public education on the risks of ticks and tick-borne disease, advising on research to develop new and accurate diagnostic tests, and by advocating for policy change on the state and federal levels to improve access to care for Lyme disease patients. These policy changes have included the formation of the Department of Health and Human Services Tick-Borne Disease Working Group in 2018 to review the science and identify research gaps, as well as legislation that in 2016 added funding for tick-borne disease research to the CDMRP program. The inclusion of consumer reviewers, which is what I was for the TDMRP program, is a unique opportunity since grant review for most federal funding agencies, such as the National Institute of Health, does not invite the perspective of stakeholders. Serving as a consumer reviewer has allowed me to advocate for scientific research that will improve patients' access to care through the development of accurate diagnostic tests a better understanding of the biological basis for persistent symptoms of Lyme disease and discovery of novel therapeutic approaches to improve quality of life. So of those two things, which one do you get, right? So a scientist that knows those words would probably do well with the published research article. But to make it simple, scientists often have to, go back and just use personal experience to be able to write to that audience. So, question?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
So, yeah, so my mom was misdiagnosed for 15 years, 10 to 15 years with and she had chronic Lyme. So I did actually kind of understand your first piece. She was actually a microbiologist until she became disabled from chronic Lyme. My question actually is on the wording you used, the two words you said. Does that mean rampant?
So prevalence means how many people have a disease in a population. And endemic means in a location. So in other words, we are in an area that's endemic for Lyme disease, meaning that our area has a higher rate of Lyme disease than other areas of the country, which is also not entirely correct. But that has to do with the issues that I presented in both of those cases, the fact that we don't have a good test to diagnose it. So rampant is a word that you might be able to use to describe Lyme disease, but I can tell you that in a scientific publication like that, unless there was evidence of rampant, we wouldn't use the word rampant.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I certainly would say it out loud, and I would certainly put it in something that I was writing in general. So, yeah.
When can the disease stay dormant?
In my daughter's case, it was, 5 or 6 years before, I mean, not that there weren't things going on, but not when she broke, right?
Mhm.
So it can go on for a very long period of time. And this is not the only disease that this occurs with. Tuberculosis, for example, can be dormant for quite a while before reactivating. Syphilis does that, others do that. Lyme disease appears to be the only one where there is contention over the fact that that actually does occur. Although, happy to report that's changing. The scientific perspective on Lyme disease is realizing, thanks to long COVID, that these long-term persisting symptoms are real and that patients are suffering, and a lot of research is being invested in trying to figure out why, the biological basis for that. So that's very encouraging. So thank you for the questions on Lyme disease too. By the way, you know this? Stephen King just wrote a novel titled Holly. So y'all better watch out.
She's coming.
I have it ready. I don't know what I'm doing, but
Well,
Thank you, Holly. Wow, we're doing well on the Stephen King references today. Those of you who like Stephen King. Do we have any other questions for any of the other presenters?
Where she's, like what, like science fiction magazines are out there?
Johanna, what science fiction magazines are out there?
I will have to get back to you on that. I kind of a newbie in science fiction, but this is a great entree. And it's available on Amazon. Ebook only $5.
Is the Asimov Quarterly or whatever still around? I used to read that when I was young, which was really a long time ago. Any other questions for our writers? Eric. The creative writers? Creative writers, how do you find the time and energy to keep at it? I find the time and energy on Saturday afternoons once a month, and that's about it. And in the summer, others are more disciplined, I'm sure, or less exhausted.
Got a lot on this.
Nancy, you looked like you had something to say.
Well, you'll notice a high percentage of us were poets, and that one reason, even though I used to also write fiction, is that poetry you can work on in small segments. And maybe fiction writers learn how to do that with their work also, but I was more like, I would get immersed and you would see me when it was done, 5 months later. A little hard once you have kids to take that approach, but being able to work in small chunks of time and then trying to do it. I once complained, when I first had a kid, to the wonderful short story writer, Grace Paley. I was like, oh, I don't have time to write. It's so hard. And everyone's telling me get up at 4, do it before work. And I was like, not going to happen. And I was like, moan. And she looked at me and she was always like chewing gum. She said, you want to write, you'll write. And I was like, oh, I don't really want to write right now. So I should just shut up and do what I'm doing and I'll get to it.
I'll call that the Bugs Bunny approach.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't see. Krista, yes. Journaling's big for me too. And I like something Lale told me once. Well, if it's not a poem yet, or it's not anything yet, at least it's something on the page. So if you start with something on the page, when you can do it, it's so much easier than staring at the blank page. That's sort of a formula for writer's block. Well, it's about time for us to scurry to our 2 o'clock classes. So I would like to thank Eric Delvaux back there, our illustrious interns, Rebecca again, and the ACC Foundation, the SUNY Adirondack Foundation, has a donor in the room, and the Faculty Student Association as well. Contributes to the Writers Project. So please come to 100,000 Poets for Change. Thursday is the Student Slam at 6 in the dorm, right? And Friday at 4 here is 100,000 Poets for Change with poets from the area, and everybody's invited. Thank you so much. Thank you, Holly. That was awesome.
Thank you.
That was really good for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love your purple too. That's my color.
This is my standard. What am I doing here?
That looks great. Yes, that's fantastic.
Yeah, this is somewhere. I know, right? There we go. Very good.
Yeah.
Twice in one.
I know. What's
Anything.
going on?
As usual, it's awesome.
Didn't see anyone.
Good to see you again. I gotta scurry off again, refresh.
I am.
Okay. It's in one
I
week.
know. I was wondering, is there a list of who are reading?
Well, that's good then. She's got the list.
Where is she gone?
I think she's going to class.
Yeah,
Dang.
just curious.
Yeah. That's a good list this year.
I don't know. It's kind of my debut or something.
No.
I'm still